Today was the first full day of the defense's case in the trial of George Zimmerman, who was charged with the second-degree murder in the killing of Trayvon Martin. Zimmerman had pleaded not guilty, claiming self-defense. The prosecution rested its case on Friday, and one of the prosecution's final witnesses before doing so was Trayvon Martin's mother, Sabrina Fulton. This is Ms. Fulton listening to part of a 911 recording in court and her reaction.
I can't see him. I don't want to go out there. I don't know what's going on. So they're sending.
So you think he's yelling help?
Yes.
Ma'am, that screaming or yelling, do you recognize that?
Yes.
And who do you recognize that to be, ma'am?
Trayvon Benjamin Martin.
Trayvon Martin's brother also testified about that very same recording.
What parts of the recording do you recognize as your brother's voice?
The yelling and the screaming.
Had you ever heard Trayvon Martin yell or scream as the two of you were growing up?
I've heard him yell, but not like that, but yes.
The defense opened its case with several witnesses, including Zimmerman's uncle, saying the person yelling for help on that recording was George Zimmerman. The defense called the defendant's mother, Gladys Zimmerman.
Do you know whose voice that was screaming in the background?
Yes, sir.
And whose voice was that?
My son, George.
And are you certain of that?
Because he's my son.
Today, the defense brought back to the stand the lead investigator of the case, Chris Serino, to testify as to the reaction of Trayvon Martin's father. Detective Serino played the recording for Tracy Martin 2 days after his son's death and asked Martin if he recognized the voice.
He looked away and under his breath, as I interpreted, said no.
The defense also called to the stand Tracy Martin himself, but Mr. Martin's own testimony seemed to contradict Officer Serino.
I think the chairs had wheels on them, and I kind of pushed away from the table and just kind of shook my head and said, "I can't tell."
So your words were, "I can't tell."
Something to that effect, but I never said, no, that wasn't my son's voice.
Mr. Martin said he listened to the tape again at the Sanford mayor's office and played it about 20 times and knew that it was, in fact, his son, Trayvon's voice. Joining me now is Karen DeSoto, criminal defense attorney, James Peterson, MSNBC contributor, director of African Studies, and associate professor of English at Lehigh University, and Tim Wise, anti-racism educator and author of the book Dear White America, Letter to a New Minority. It was incredibly difficult to watch Trayvon Martin's father on the stand today, trying to hold it together, trying to keep his composure under these conditions. And it's strange to end up so much time is being spent on this specific contesting this one piece of evidence, whose voice is on the tape. Why is that so important to the case, Karen?
Well, it's important because obviously the defense wants to prove that Zimmerman was not the aggressor, he didn't provoke the situation, and that he didn't create the situation. So if he was the one crying for help, obviously, you know, he wasn't the one who put himself in that situation. That's what they're trying to prove, and obviously whoever's crying for help is the person that's in a position of vulnerability. And if that's Zimmerman, obviously his self-defense is going to be a lot more credible.
It strikes me as bizarre just watching this, this kind of contest over the plausibility of Trayvon Martin as essentially the aggressor in all of this, which, yeah.
I mean, how do we arrive at that? I mean, Trayvon Martin is the victim. He's right. No longer with us. Not only can he not defend himself, but I think, you know, we can talk more about this, but this really cuts along racial lines. And, you know, when I was listening and watching Tracy Martin today, I was unable to keep my composure, because at the end of the day, if you've studied his face over the course of this trial, he has sort of been an examination of pain and loss and frustration in this particular case. He really reflects, I think, the way the black community feels about the Trayvon Martin case right now.
And let's be very honest. I mean, even if you looked at this evidence in the light most favorable to George Zimmerman, here's the reality. If George Zimmerman does not perceive Trayvon Martin as a threat in that community, from the beginning, he does not pursue him, and no one knows who Trayvon is. He is still alive, and George Zimmerman is just a pathetic wannabe cop. But unfortunately, because he decided this young man didn't deserve to be in the community, he followed him, and that is the process which led to all of this horrible action.
That to me is the deep moral truth about the justice here, but is not necessarily the legal truth that is salient, right? Because it is the case, the way the charges have been brought and the way that the case has been constructed, that is, if it turns out to be the case that the jurors believe that it was in fact George Zimmerman screaming help on that tape, that can clear the bar for him to be acquitted.
Well, in Florida, lesser included offenses are automatic, so there will be a charge for manslaughter. So
explain what that means, lesser included offense.
A lesser included offense is the manslaughter, the lesser offense of manslaughter, which is culpable negligence. So you really don't have to
prove depraved mind.
You don't have to do the depraved mind thing, so it's a little bit. So if they could negate his self-defense, which would be saying that he created the situation and therefore he was negligent for putting themselves into that situation, then you would have an argument for the manslaughter charge. And I do believe that that's probably what the prosecution is going to at least focus on now, because second degree, I believe, is off the table.
I think it's awful that we have to settle for that ultimately, because the court of public opinion sees this case. They see that a kid went to a store to buy Skittles and iced tea to walk back home to his father's home and didn't make it back. And we don't see anything else beyond that. And so this criminal justice system, is not working out for folks who see it.
I think what's interesting about the way that we watch this case, this trial, is the side we find ourselves on, the part of the trial that we end up rooting for. And let me tell you, my friend circle includes a lot more defense attorneys than it does prosecutors. I know my friends there's a lot more public defenders in my friend circle than there are prosecutors, and that's a fact about me. But I think we are seeing an interesting reception on each side of the political aisle about where they stand with this, and I want to talk about that. I want to play some tape from Fox News right after we take this break.
Do you feel you wouldn't be here for this interview if you didn't have that gun?
No, sir.
You feel you would not be here?
I feel that it was all God's plan, and for me to second guess it or judge it.
Is there anything you might do differently in retrospect, now that time has passed a little bit?
No, sir.
As Fox News replaying an interview with Sean Hannity that got played in court. A quite sympathetic interview. I'm here with Karen DeSoto, a criminal defense attorney, MSNBC contributor James Peterson, and Tim Wise, anti-racism educator. We're talking about the Zimmerman trial. And what's interesting to me, Tim, as someone who locates himself on the left, I tend to be very skeptical of the machinery of the criminal justice system, partly because growing up in the Bronx when I did, at the period of time I did.
Because of the data.
Because of the data, right, exactly.
It's a biased system.
And yet here we are, I find myself being really angry at the defense, or watching the defense with skepticism, and watching and sort of on the side of the prosecution.
Well, and let's be honest, people on the right who are normally completely willing to support the state and the DAs and just about anything they do, in this particular case, are all public defenders.
Right, that's exactly. Everyone's a bleeding heart now.
And I think what this tells us, and it's an important point to make for all of us to think about, is that none of us come to any of these issues, particularly when race is in the frame, from a totally objective place. When race is in the picture, we all, or when class or sexuality or anything is in the picture, we come with our own assumptions. I mean, very few people, for instance, who now were saying, well, George Zimmerman is innocent until proven guilty. Of course, that's true in the court of law. But how many of those people were really thinking that OJ might be innocent when he was in the Bronco in June of '94? Like, they made their assumptions.
Or was saying that about Ariel Castro when those 3 women came out of the house in Cleveland, which, again, was like a monstrous crime, but like, he's also innocent until proven guilty. That's a principle. And today in court, we saw in some ways the defense trying to use the political kind of explosion around this case to their own defense.
I agree. I think that one of the defense tactics was to put Trayvon Martin's dad on the stand to set up the next witness, which was the chief of police, who basically testified that it was what the mayor did by playing the tape to Trayvon Martin's dad was improper. It was not best practices, and kind of gave this inference that there was some kind of political
right. So here's the mayor kind of helicoptering into an active investigation.
Not
playing
the police, the mayor.
And the irony here, right, is that of course we all saw this injustice play out in real time. The injustice, I mean, of the non-arrest, right? And yet it's remarkable to see that injustice was then redressed, and now in the actual trial, the sequence of that being used itself by the defense.
Right.
I mean, again, look at this police department. Look at the history of the San Francisco Police Department. This is not an A-plus police department. So for them to now point the finger at the mayor for playing politics, we have to go back to that moment where there wasn't an arrest, where we were looking really squarely squarely at the Sanford Police Department. And remember, this is a reluctant prosecution. This is not the kind of prosecution you normally see in these kinds of cases. And so at the end of the day, I think the court of public opinion is not going to match up with what's going on in that courtroom. That's where I think we're getting this tension as the case starts to wind down.
Well, I think that one of the problems is that the state of Florida giving out concealed weapons to their citizens when it's very difficult in other states to get a concealed weapon, and then expect that these type of things are not going to happen. I mean, it's really, no one is winning in this case, but the state of Florida, I think the Martins should go ahead and file something against the state of Florida for liability correlated to that, because if you're going to give George Zimmermans of the world guns who are not military, not trained police, and expect that this is not going to happen.
And someone who's not, historically been proven to be the most stable individual. I mean, this is what happens when we have an overly armed society, in a society particularly where racial bias is so prevalent. All of these things combine to create these kind of disasters.
Criminal defense attorney Karen DeSoto, MSNBC contributor James Peterson, anti-racism educator Tim Wise. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chris.